Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight for the Don't Legislate Hate Forum, hosted by the Heart of Iowa Democrats, which is Benton, Iowa, Marshall, Poweshiek, and Tama counties, and the Iowa Democratic Party's Stonewall caucus. My name is Kathy Focht. I'm the chair of the Iowa County Democrats. CJ Peterson is also on tonight with us. He's the chair of the Stonewall caucus, and we'll be speaking a little bit later. You'll get to hear from him. Before we start, a few housekeeping items. We are live streaming tonight to the Heart of Iowa Facebook page, and the recording will also be available tomorrow on YouTube, or no later than tomorrow on YouTube. You can view a transcript of this by selecting live transcription on the toolbar. And Kieran, can you make sure that's activated at the bottom of your screen? You will be muted throughout the call and you can't unmute yourself. So, if you want to talk to us through the chat room. If you have a question this evening, drop it in the chat room by clicking the chat button on the toolbar. We're going to start with the questions that were submitted in advance some people did that when they registered for the Zoom call, and we will get to as many of the chat room questions as possible. I'm going to drop, when I'm done speaking, I'll drop the Heart of Iowa Democrats email address into the chat room. CJ will do the same for the Stonewall caucus, and feel free to communicate with us anytime about anything. Tonight, I'm pleased to welcome Senator Zach Wahls, who's going to be the moderator this evening. Zach is an Iowa State Senator for the 43rd District, an American LGBTQ+ activist, and an author. He was first elected to the Senate in 2018, and he was elected to his second term in 2022, representing Senate District 43, which includes Coralville, North Liberty, Solon, part of Western Iowa City, and rural Northeast Johnson County. Zach has served as the Iowa Senate Democratic leader since November 2020. I'm going to hand it over to Zach now, and he will make the introductions of the other great people we have here. Thanks, Zach.
Kathy, thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm really grateful to you and CJ for providing the opportunity to have this forum, and it's fantastic to see so many Iowa Democrats with us this evening. I'm coming to you tonight from my office here in Des Moines, where we are obviously in the thick of the legislative session, and we're spending a lot of our time debating and trying to prevent the advance of several anti-LGBTQ pieces of legislation. And it's a very unfortunate reality that we are where we are, but it is very, very helpful and frankly very inspiring for me to see so many people from our state party and several of my constituents who are here with us tonight. In particular, I see that we've got our new Iowa Democratic Party first vice chair, Gregory Christensen, with us this evening. Gregory, tremendously appreciate all that you do to advocate for the LGBTQ community. And I think I also see that we have DeMarcus Carter with us this evening as well, who does a wonderful job on our State Central Committee representing the DEI caucus. So we have a lot of folks with us tonight. I see I've got several constituents here as well. So it gives me a lot of energy and excitement to see so many people from across the state joining us this evening for an incredibly important conversation. A few of the things that we'll do tonight, obviously, take questions and try to answer questions that are out there about what is happening here at the State House, provide some of that information. But as many of you know, Republicans in Iowa have introduced several anti-LGBTQ pieces of legislation involving various things about don't say gay, don't say trans, forced outing, and unfortunately even more than that. What we're seeing in the Senate is essentially an attempt to advance bills that will result in what we feel, frankly, are censorship, that are going to hurt Iowa kids and to make our schools less welcoming places. As we talk about these proposals with our colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle, and one of our top messages on this legislation is the fact that they're going to be trying to put teachers in the middle of mediating these different views that different parents are going to have in a community. We know that our communities are filled with a rich diversity of people who have, frankly, different views, different worldviews about what is appropriate or inappropriate to be teaching in a classroom. And what our Republicans want is for teachers to be the people responsible for mediating these disagreements. And Democrats simply think that it's actually not the role of the teacher to be trying to mediate disagreements between parents. We think it's the role of teachers to be providing a safe and welcoming environment for all students so that our students can be focused on actually learning in the classroom, which is why they're there in the first place. We know that in the Iowa Senate, we have a few different bills, one that is focused on don't say gay, and a separate that is focused on don't say trans. And we know that it's legislation like this that is going to turn our schools into a culture war battleground. And it's ultimately our children who are going to be hurt. I'm sure, like many of you, I was really inspired by some of the testimony that we heard over the last several weeks from the kids who are going to be most impacted by this legislation. I think we're going to have the opportunity to hear from some of those families this evening. But these are proposed bills, legislation that can be put into the categories of censorship and surveillance. And I think that it is the Democratic perspective that, you know, the best way to talk about this legislation is in that context of censorship and surveillance. These bills are completely unnecessary, and they are trying to solve imaginary problems at a time when we have real problems that we're trying to solve. These are divisive culture war issues that are going to worsen the ability of our state to keep Iowans here in our state, or to attract new people either to move to Iowa for the first time or to move home. If, like so many of my high school or college classmates, they'd be considering moving back to Iowa. We know that our schools should be protecting all students, right, including LGBTQ students, so that they can learn and that they can thrive in a safe educational environment. That is the entire point of our educational system. The politicians who are behind this legislation are trying to erase LGBTQ students, families, and history by banning any discussion about them in our schools. We feel strongly that this sends a message that LGBTQ kids and those of us who have LGBTQ parents, including myself, aren't welcome in our classrooms or our schools. And we already know that LGBTQ students are already at dramatically increased risk of adverse mental health effects when they don't have support from their family and from their peers. And that is something that I think the legislature should be much more focused on rather than these censorship and surveillance bills. And so with that, we obviously have some incredible folks to be with us this evening, and we're going to turn some of this conversation over to them. Give me just one moment here as I pull up the introduction for Sarah and for Odin. Sarah Carter and Odin Small Carter are with us tonight. Odin is a third grader in Fort Dodge Public Schools. She likes playing Roblox, does competition dance, and her favorite color is pink. She also happens to be a transgender student. Sarah Small Carter is Odin's full-time mom, a Democrat, an LGBTQ community advocate, and a member of the Stonewall caucus, and in her spare time is a private chef. So Sarah and Odin, why don't we turn it over to you?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having us here. We'll get started. I think Odin's going to interject when I'm saying the wrong things, because that's exactly the perfect way 9-year-olds communicate. We were talking this week about when we were asked to share our story with you all tonight. She's disappearing. Odin and I were talking this week about what is our story, and the reality of it is that we really have two different stories, because my perspective of a mom and her perspective growing up, they're two different perspectives. So from my perspective, I was a single parent to a beautiful baby that had some health struggles after she was born, and assigned male at birth. But by the time that Odin got up and walking, Odin was playing dress up with my high heels as soon as Odin could walk. And by the time Odin turned 2, Odin was getting into my makeup and destroying it all, like any toddler in their terrible 2s. But Odin was getting and painting her face with my makeup. And by the time Odin was 3, my rambunctious little child was taking pillowcases and cutting holes in them to make dresses. because she desperately needed to be wearing dresses and cinching them down with belts. And I say all of this to say that when we talk about the fear-mongering, red herring policies about, you know, are there boys in the girls' bathroom, or these these horrible, horrible things. My child has never been a boy. My child has always seen the world as a little girl. Now, Odin decided to share with us, her parents, the summer between 1st and 2nd grade, that she was transgender. And that came after a conversation where she learned the definition of the word transgender, and she responded, "Oh, like me." And we responded, "Well, you'll figure that out as you grow up." There is such a myth that families like ours are immediately throwing out all the clothes and immediately transitioning our children. These are intimate, personal decisions that are made with the guidance of our family and close friends and mentors and spiritual guidance, and doing the best things for our kids. Because, you know, we're a normal family, just like every other island family. And I think for a lot of people, it's hard to imagine what life is like for a family with a transgender child. And because, I mean, for most people, up to 80% of people have never met an out transgender person. But now you all have. You've met us, and you've met Odin. Yeah, anyway. So that's not an excuse. We're normal Iowans, just like everybody else, and we're parents trying to make the best decisions for our kids. Uh-oh, she disappeared again. And my choice for my child is for her to be supported and loved in a safe public school. And these bills deny her that. So that's why we're here and we're talking, and loudly, because this is a human rights issue. Do you have anything you want to say, sweetie? I'm gonna say thank you. And I'm so proud of Odin because she was able to testify at the Senate, even if she's being asked till now. She's able to say things in front of Republicans and stand up for herself, because it's not fair that she's treated differently at school by her peers because they lack the appropriate education about people of varying identities. And I'll pass it back to Zach.
Yeah, Sarah, I want to say thank you to you and to Odin, as someone who knows a little bit about how intimidating and scary it can be to testify in front of the legislature about how proposed legislation will affect your family. I just want to say that I hold you and Odin in incredibly high esteem. I thought that Odin's courage is something that all Iowans should be able to emulate. And I think the fact that you had to take time out of your lives to come to the State House, I mean, during school hours, when, you know, Odin should have been in the classroom, should have been learning, should have been spending time with their peers. That's what we should have been doing. And the fact that we have a Republican legislature that is so much more focused on inflicting their views on all of us, right? That's the problem. And that's really what we should be speaking to. And unfortunately, obviously, they're trying to move us in a different direction. So I hope that everybody out here can join me in thanking Sarah and Odin for the courage that they're demonstrating tonight. And
if I could just speak to that education point too. I mean, before we came down for the hearing, I had a meeting with her teacher and school social worker and principal, and they were all aware that we were going to go down to Des Moines and pull her out of school to be at the Capitol that day when she testified. And every one of the, you know, like the full team at the school fully supported that decision, because they, as educators, knew the value of that to our child was important. You know, so these decisions don't need to be legislated from the, governor's pen all the way down, families and schools are perfectly capable of working together to figure out plans that are best for students at each individual level without the government getting involved at all.
I mean, Sarah, I certainly felt the same way when it came to, my own family and the ability of my parents to get married. Why the legislature felt like it was their responsibility to intervene and all of that never made any sense to me. And so I just, again, I hope that everyone who's on our forum this evening can join me in thanking Sarah and Odin for their courage, because the decision that you made to speak up and share your story is going to have a positive, transformative impact for Iowans who you will never meet. And that, to me, is exactly why we do what we do, is that we're willing to fight for people who we don't know and to share our stories, knowing that's going to transform the world. So thank you from me. And I will say this from all of my Senate Democratic colleagues, that testimony really resonated with all of us. And I just want to say thank you. I will also say that we have an incredible panel of folks joining us tonight for the discussion about the legislation that we are seeing at the State House. We have first, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Elinor Levin. Elinor is a newly elected member of the Iowa House of Representatives from House District 89 in Iowa City. Elinor, I'll turn it over to you to provide some quick opening remarks before we go on to the rest of our panel.
Thank you so much. As Zach said, I'm new to this, and to be asked to speak at an event like this is such an honor, because I would usually be attending an event like this. And I try very hard to keep in mind that I am not speaking for any big group, but sometimes someone has to speak up. And I've found myself getting more and more opportunities to do that. And it's scary and it's exciting and it's wonderful. And it's, I wish we didn't need to do it so often. I am an Iowan by choice, twice over. I moved here originally in 2005 from the Chicago area to attend Cornell College. Basically fell in love with Iowa and decided I wanted to stay here. My spouse is active duty military, so we moved around a little bit, but as soon as we were able to, we made our way back here. He's still in the Navy, so he actually doesn't live here right now, but my work is here, trying to make Iowa a safe place and a welcoming place for all of us. And so this is the work I want to be doing and the work I'm excited to be doing. So thank you so much. I'm also one of the few queer legislators we have in the State House. And so I try to bring that perspective with me. I'm also an educator, so I'm coming here tonight bringing that perspective with me. So I thank you so much and looking forward to the conversation. And I want to add my kind of thoughts to Sarah and Odin that if it were up to me, you two would just be able to have your lives and not have to have these conversations. But the fact is that, as you mentioned, Sarah, a lot of people don't understand that families with trans kids are just trying to live their lives like anyone else. And so it is incredibly valuable that you are willing to give of your time and to give of yourselves. And I want to thank you for that.
Amen. Appreciate that. Next, I want to just briefly introduce Mary Peterson. Mary is a high school counselor at the Iowa City Community School Districts, working in Iowa City High School. She's also a member of the LGBTQ steering committee for the district. And she is an Iowa City native and has worked in education for almost 15 years in various roles. Mary, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Zach, and thanks for having me. I'm really grateful to be here and to help advocate for this. Sarah and Odin, once again, thank you so much for sharing your story. That is brave and necessary, and it's really appreciated, and you're not the only one. Being a school counselor, I see this a lot with a lot of my students at City High School. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this and can't wait to answer some questions.
Thanks, Mary. And finally, we're joined by Damian Thompson from Iowa Safe Schools. I've known Damian for several years at this point, and Damian is a constant presence at the State House, where he does a great job informing Iowa legislators of how various pieces of legislation will impact their constituents and their communities. So Damian, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Senator, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Damian Thompson. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm the Director of Public Policy and Communications for Iowa Safe Schools. We are the Midwest's largest LGBTQ youth serving organization, working with over 10,000 students in all of Iowa's 99 counties every single year. So, like Senator Wahls indicated, I spend most of my time during session up at the State House chatting with our elected officials on both sides of the aisle, but also ensuring that our students have a voice in this fight. And we're looking forward to our day on the Hill next week. So thank you.
Thanks, Damian. With that, we have a couple of questions that have been submitted ahead of time, so we'll go ahead and start with those. For those of you who are with us this evening or who have not already submitted a question ahead of time, please go ahead and use the chat box. We are going to do our very best to answer as many questions as we can. We may not be able to get to every question that we have tonight, but we will do our absolute best. We'll go ahead and start with a question from Diane Duncan Goldsmith from Iowa City, who asks, do you think the Republican legislators and governor will successfully remove gender as a protected class when it comes to discrimination? If so, would there be any ramifications from the federal government? And I'll make one clarifying point. I think Diane is referring to specifically gender identity in that question. So I'll go ahead and turn it over. Damian, why don't we go ahead and start with you on that question?
Thank you, Senator. In terms of the bill to strike gender identity from the Civil Rights Act, House File 190, as introduced the other week, this is one area, interestingly enough, that our Iowa corporate community actually stands up and engages on and pushes back against. So whether it's this or Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which would essentially, in a roundabout way, create Swiss cheese of the Iowa Civil Rights Act and allow a ton of additional loopholes, our corporate community stands up against these bills. And so thankfully, that one I don't necessarily foresee going anywhere, especially since it was assigned to the Judiciary Committee. And in the past, Judiciary Committee Chairman, Representative Steve Holt, has been pretty crystal clear on not being interested in letting this move forward. That's not the see-all, end-all by any means, but it is definitely a good sign. So that is something in my discussions, hopefully shouldn't be going anywhere. But in terms of the repercussions, thankfully, in Bostock versus Clayton County, Title VII protections were interpreted to include gender identity and sexual orientation. So now we do have federal protections in the employment area, at least, and the rest of those civil rights areas like Title IX, for example, are kind of making their way through either executive action or the courts in terms of whether they also include those protections. But thankfully, we should hopefully not have to worry about that for the time being, based on the information I just shared.
Thanks, Damian. Elinor, anything to add from what you're hearing over in the House, maybe?
I would just add that one of the things I kind of have been watching on, one of the things that I try to give myself the grace to pay attention to is the pace with which things move. This bill was introduced a week ago. It has yet to even be assigned to a subcommittee. That gives me hope that somebody feels strongly about this, but not enough people for it to have momentum behind it. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not worth reaching out and saying, this is a horrible idea, please don't do it. Right now, it's not top of my list of concerns on the House side. I'll put it that way. It is a pretty egregious decision to even file this bill, of course. And the number of, the other thing that I pay attention to on this one is the number of co-sponsors. We have 12 Republican representatives who elected to put their names on this bill. That's very frustrating and frankly hurtful to me. but I don't see that it has much momentum behind it so far.
Mary, could you maybe help speak to what you would see the consequences be of potentially removing that protection as it would pertain to gender identity in an educational setting? You know, obviously we know that there are many different bills that have been moved forward over the last several years that are targeting gender identity, but just on a practical day-to-day level, what do you see being the importance of protecting students who have a non-traditional gender identity in an educational setting?
Well, as you stated earlier, we want our schools to be safe. And that's the bottom line. If students don't feel safe, they're not going to learn, they're not going to be nurtured, they're not going to reach the potential that they probably could. And so I think this bill would really impact that. On a day-to-day basis, I see a lot of students coming in who, their gender identity is what they want it to be and what it actually is. And so we support them as much as we can. But if we can't do that as a school, I think that will start impacting the safety of students. I have some data like from our district, which is the Iowa City School District. 27% of students that are non-binary always feel safe at school. That's very low. We want to improve that. And this bill would not help improve that. So I think it would just be detrimental to students' mental health.
Thanks, Mary. Our next question is from Cindy Conjure. Cindy, nice to hear from you. Cindy wants to know or asks, I do know about some of the many ways the current legislation could harm LGBTQ plus students. It would be especially helpful to be finding out how they can best be protected in schools. Mary, you just spoke a little bit to what some of the consequences or what the stakes are. Damian, could you maybe speak a little bit to what you see as the best ways to protect these kids in our classrooms? Obviously, one of the most important things that we can do is advocate against the legislation that is being brought forward. But what are additional steps that folks who want to be supportive can take to be protective as we can?
Absolutely. So a lot of different options ahead of us here. Senator Wahls mentioned, obviously, contacting your state legislators, whether it's your state representative or state senator. That is a crucial piece of the puzzle here. They need to hear from you, whether it's in person at a forum, a phone call, email, snail mail, as I like to call it. Very important that they're hearing from you. In addition to that, we have a lot of different ability for folks to engage in the public sphere. So whether that's writing a letter to the editor, an opinion piece, we as an organization have a great day on the Hill coming up. One Iowa had a fantastic day of advocacy on the Hill, I believe it was last week. Coming to our events, whether it's our legislative reception, fundraiser, I'll tell you, my position is entirely funded by small donor dollars. So donating to organizations like Iowa Safe Schools or One Iowa, all great ways to ensure that you're engaged. And if you want to get even more involved in that, I'm always happy to hear. And my email is publicly available. I'll drop it here in the chat.
Thanks, Damian. We're getting a bunch of great questions in the chat, so I really appreciate all of that. One point I want to just briefly underscore that Damian made is that it is so important to contact your legislators. One thing that can sometimes be challenging about that is that every legislator has a different way that they prefer to be contacted. Representative Levin and I were at a forum just a few weeks ago where the question came up of what is the best way to contact legislators. I think that we had 6 different legislators on the panel and we heard 6 different responses. And as a result, what I would encourage everybody on this Zoom this evening is that don't only contact your legislator in one way. Don't hesitate, whether it's to make a phone call, send an email, send a letter, send a social media message. All of those can be a positive way of reaching out to your representative or to your senator to send that message. The other thing that I would say is that for anybody who has a Republican senator or a Republican representative, just make sure that you understand that you have a superpower that those of us who live in Coralville or Iowa City or Des Moines don't necessarily have. Because if you have a Democratic representative or a Democratic senator, the odds are pretty high that you already have a member of the legislature who is supportive on these issues. If you have a Republican legislator, you actually have the opportunity to affect one of the most critical people whose mind can actually impact the outcome of these votes. So while it can sometimes feel defeatist to be represented by somebody who you may think disagrees with you on a topic that is incredibly important to you and your family, I'm actually here to tell you that you have the somewhat unique ability to actually impact that person's viewpoint on this really important topic. I don't know, Elinor or Mary, if either of you would like to add a little bit more to the answer that we got from Damian on this question.
The only thing I would add personally is we see a lot of reply all emails, a lot of emails where people send like an email to all 100 representatives or all 50 senators or all 150 of us. And I applaud the sentiment. But I think while we do note those and some of us pay attention to them, what I recommend to people is, even if you live, for example, if you live in my district, I love to hear from you. If we agree and I hear from you, that's fantastic, because it reminds me that I actually do have a good sense of what's going on in my district and what people want and what people value. But what you also can do is think about, where do you have kids? Where do you have grandkids? Where do you have connections? If you grew up in a different district, if you own property in a different district, if you're a partial owner in a farm in a different district, those are really great things to contact the legislators who represent those areas and start off with that connection and say, you know, I grew up in the area that you represent. I really care about the schools in that area. Or my grandkids currently live in your district. Or I moved away from your district 10 years ago. I, ate every day at this cafe that you still represent. If you're able to have some sort of personal connection to the area that legislator represents, that can help to get them to take that message more seriously and more personally. The other thing I would say is, if you write to your legislator and they don't reply to you, you can't get a response. If you email them, call them, social media, send up a smoke signal, whatever it is, and you don't get a reply, you should feel free to reach out to someone else and say, my legislator is not listening to me. So that's, for example, I've had people reach out to me and say, my legislator just doesn't respond. And that is really helpful to know. And sometimes there are conversations that can be had. I'm not going to go up to another legislator and say, hey, I heard from your constituent that you're not responding to them. But that doesn't mean there aren't things to do and that there aren't conversations that can be had. And you should expect to hear responses from your legislators.
All right. Our next question is from Sonia, who it's a little more of a comment, but I'm sure that we'll have some good reaction to it. Sonia observes, these angry discussions are also hard on the teachers and librarians. We should be respecting them, not denigrating them. Mary, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think educators get caught in the middle because we're trying to do our job and to teach to every student. And when doing that, we look at the wide variety of students that we serve every day, and they're not one size fits all. And when people start getting upset at educators for teaching a certain book or allowing books to be in the library, it's hard because we're specifically trying to reach all students. And so I think it's really important to remember that the educators are here to educate all students, not just a certain type of student.
I don't know, Damian or Elinor, if either of you have any additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, in my public comments in subcommittee and to the media, I've made it crystal clear. I mean, folks wonder why we have a teacher shortage. It's because of legislation like this, whether it's the governor's private school bailout bill or legislation like curriculum censorship that creates just a mountain of red tape for educators, administrators who are already very busy and have a ton on their plate, as I'm sure Representative Levin can speak to. So it certainly is not helping. Folks want to live here broadly, but also folks maybe wanting to come to school here to be an educator and stay here.
All right. Our next question, again, a little bit more of a comment. G from Guttenberg has an observation about how the impact of concealed carry and sometimes open carry firearms are having an intimidating impact. I'll just take a quick moment to say, someone who does believe in the Second Amendment and is a gun owner myself, I obviously have some really grave concerns about how firearms are being weaponized to intimidate other people. These are not things that are meant to be used in a way that are supposed to intimidate our fellow citizens or other people in the public. They're meant to be for either recreation or self-defense. And so when you see them being used in a way that intentionally is scaring or intimidating others, that has a chilling effect on free speech, which is not the Third Amendment, but the First Amendment. In the First Amendment, right, guarantees our ability to express ourselves in the public square and to assemble peaceably in support of the things that we believe in. And so I certainly understand and can empathize with the support that we're hearing from that comment. And so I certainly think that all of us who care about these must continue to have a lot of courage. That is part, Sarah, of why we're all so grateful for you and for Odin for sharing your story and helping educate our fellow Iowans about the lived experiences, the challenges, the joys that you've gotten to experience, and the fact that you're willing to fight for your fellow Iowans is the thing that I think can really inspire all of us. We have a couple of other questions that are coming through the chat here. Again, if you did not submit a question ahead of time, I hope that you can take this opportunity to chime in here using the chat function here on Zoom. We're going to do our best to get to as many questions as we possibly can. There was a question from someone earlier who asked specifically about how to best lobby Senator Lynn Evans. Senator Evans is from Northwest Iowa. He's a new legislator. Kathy, I appreciate you being willing to reach out to Lynn. I was actually really impressed that Lynn voted against the governor's anti-public education, quote unquote, vouchers bill that is going to use taxpayer money to fund private schools. Kathy says in her question here that you'd spoken to Senator Levin, Senator Lynn Evans, excuse me, sorry, Elinor, and that Lynn listened respectfully to hear you and your family's story, but that he had co-sponsored one of the hateful pieces of legislation that we had seen. What more can I do to try to influence him? Kathy, I would encourage you just on a personal level, don't hesitate to reach out and express your disappointment. I would encourage you to directly connect the fact that you had reached out to him and shared your story, and then point out the fact that he had co-sponsored this legislation and ask, you'd listened respectfully to me. Was there a part of the story that we shared that you maybe didn't understand? One of the things that I always try to focus here in the legislature, what is the problem that this legislation is trying to solve? And speak to that really, really clearly. And I'd encourage you to try to get Lynn to answer that question. It's always really important to understand what kind of context your legislator might be seeing the situation through. Lynn has a public education background. He was a superintendent. And so speak to that, right? We heard from Sarah how supportive so many of the administrators in her district were when they decided to come down to Des Moines. So what is it that might be different about Lynn's experience that might cause a difference in that level of sympathy? And try to really understand that, because the better you can understand the people who are opposed to you, the better you can speak to the concerns that they might have. Elinor, I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to add to that answer, or Mary or Damian, obviously feel free to speak up as well.
I don't think I have anything to add. I think you covered it really well.
one thing that I would say, just kind of underscoring a point that Elinor made earlier, in the emails to all 150 legislators, they don't go very far. People in the legislature, and frankly, I put myself into this category. If you hear from a constituent of yours who, and it sounds like Kathy, you have that relationship with Senator Evans, if you have that personal connection and you make that direct relationship, that can be really impactful. If you're sending a broad-based email to all 150 legislators, it can be sometimes hard to get a response. One thing that I would just simply observe is that the more effort you have to put into a communication, the more likely you are to get a response that requires a commensurate effort. When we just click the one button petition email thingies, and I'll be the one, I'll tell you, it's important for senators and representatives to hear from a lot of people, and that's the easiest way to do it. But the more effort that you put in, which is why, by the way, whenever I get a handwritten note, I always take the time to respond in the same way, because if my constituent is going to put in that amount of time, I feel it's my responsibility as their representative in the Senate to return that favor as well. Our next question.
I'm sorry, Zach. I did think of one thing, if I may.
Go ahead.
Sorry, which is if you are, and I think this was sort of mentioned in the chat, but it seems like something that's good to toss in here. It is definitely appropriate to email the members of a committee or subcommittee on a particular bill. Absolutely do that, whether or not they represent you personally. They represent you on that subcommittee or on that committee. So absolutely it is appropriate. And when you say members of the subcommittee on this bill, or when you say members of the education committee or of the judiciary committee, those are emails that people do pay attention to. I will also, since I care about the people in this room and I want them to be successful, I will mention, if you really are feeling the need to send an email to all 150 of us, if you BCC it, it doesn't look so much like you just copied and pasted one email to all 150 of us. Just a suggestion.
Damian, Representative Levin just mentioned the committee process. Could you do all of us a quick favor and explain why those committee folks are so important to the process?
Absolutely. So I wish I had a visual graphic, but once a bill is introduced, whatever subject area it is pertaining to, for the most part, is referred to the appropriate committee. So there's judiciary, education, appropriations, all these different committees based on subject matter of the bill. And once it's referred to a committee, it's assigned to what's called a subcommittee. These are typically 3 members, sometimes larger, depending on what the bill is. 2 members being from the majority party, so 2 Republicans and 1 from the minority, a Democrat. And they sit and discuss the legislation, their opinions on it, and they move it forward or hold it back. But the subcommittee is the only time that members of the public and lobbyists can speak publicly against or for a bill. So it is a really crucial time. Like Representative Levin mentioned, you don't always have your legislator on those 3 members. So they are ideally supposed to take feedback from all corners of the state. That isn't always true, but I do highly recommend that you still engage, whether it's coming up to the State House, speaking via email or letter, or, which I don't know if the Senate will continue to do this, Zoom. The Senate does offer Zoom participation on those, but not the House. And then once it advances from there, there's committees that vary in size, let's say around 10 people, with majority members being Republican in both chambers, and they evaluate the bill and debate amongst themselves. The public cannot engage besides watching these debates. But again, your member might not always be on these committees, so it's important, and ideally, these members should be considering voices from all Iowans. And after it passes committee, it would then go to the floor for debate, which all members would be considering it. And so then you would probably want to focus on your specific state senator or state representative. So hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Damian. I thought that was an abbreviated version of "I'm Just a Bill" from Schoolhouse Rock. Mary, our next question is from Tucker Cassidy, and Tucker asks, what can you all suggest that we allies can do to be most effective in our support of these marginalized groups of students, their families, and their teachers? So Mary, I thought just given your background, that might be a good question for you to start. Then Elinor and Damian could chime in with additional thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you just supporting people, just always advocating for them, advocating for their rights, is a great way to do that. And making sure that they don't get lost, if you will, and just kind of shuffled under the rug. So like what you're all talking about, contacting your legislators, you know, communicating with even school staff and parents, and all those things will help students in that regard.
Thanks, Mary. Elinor or Damian, anything to add?
I think that was great.
The only other thing I would add is not everyone can show up in the same ways, but everyone can show up somehow. So if, whether that means when you hear that folks have been showing up to a school board meeting to protest the books that are in the library, show up and take up a seat in that room and say that you support the library. It's so much easier to not show up when you're happy with the status quo or when you support something that's happening. But it could also mean sending a letter to your school board or to your legislator if you're not able to physically show up that evening. It can also mean sending an email to a teacher who's being called out for supporting the kids in their classroom, or who's having complaints made against them. It can also mean volunteering. It can mean so many different things, but find your way to show up and be supportive, whether in person or not.
Thanks. Anne-Marie Krause had two questions that were, I think, actually linked. And I think Damian actually did a nice job just a few moments ago speaking to the question about contacting lawmakers who may not necessarily be your senator or your representative. But Anne-Marie asked that specifically relating to efforts to ban books that might be related to LGBTQ rights, wanting to know about the status of the recent hearing in which Moms for Liberty, which is a ultra far right group that's predominantly funded by out-of-state special interests. They were reading from these books and saying that if one person objects to a book, it should be banned in all schools. Frankly, many of the books that they wanted to be banned have LGBTQ characters and topics. Anne-Marie, let me speak briefly to that, and then happy to hear some more discussion from the panel here. You know, one of the things that was really troubling to me when I heard about this is how this is a great example of how Iowa Republicans don't trust Iowans to make the decisions about what the right books and topics are for their communities, for their families, for their schools. The idea that you would take the concern of a single person and apply that across an entire system is the exact opposite of what they say they're fighting for. They say that this is about parental choice, but banning books across the entire state because one school district decides that's not right for them is the exact opposite of parental choice. I want to say that again. Banning books across the entire state because one school district decides that book is not right for them is the exact opposite of parental choice. If we believe in this state that parents and school districts should have the choice, the freedom to choose what books and what content are right for them, their families, their school district, then we absolutely cannot have a one-size-fits-all policy, which is what they were pushing for. Now, whether that is about LGBTQ topics, whether that is about race, whether that's about gender, whether that's about politics, I've seen books for, or these lists of banning books that are out there that include banning things like The Handmaid's Tale, which is a book that speaks to, so many different themes that are an important part of the conversations we are having in this country about the future of our politics. And so I think it's just really important for us, again, to be focused on that question that we raised earlier. what is the problem that we are trying to solve? And when one school district can decide for the entire state what books are appropriate, that is not democracy. That is not freedom, right? So I have really grave concerns about what that might be. And I don't know, Mary, I mean, what would it mean for Iowa City to be impacted by decisions that are being made in Orange City, you know, or any other school district across the state? What would that mean for your students?
Yeah, this particular bill has us questioning things, you know, the implications, and I don't know, like, you know, they want us to list all the books we have in the library and all the books that we include in our curriculum, which we do in the Iowa City District. So we're kind of like, okay, we're already doing that. It doesn't apply to us. But I think if it's banned in one district and then we have to ban it, I don't know what that would look like. You know, we follow the law at the Iowa City District, but also we have to remember, like, if students want to read a book, they're going to read a book. Like, why not read it and then have a conversation about it? So it's very interesting. And I totally agree with how you are describing the whole situation. We're taking away parental right when we are not allowing students to read a book at school. And that is just an interesting perspective, and they're just trying to like clamp down on some things. So we'll have to see where it turns out.
Yeah. All right. We've had some absolutely fantastic conversation so far. I want to thank everyone in the audience who has sent in a question. We've had some really, really great ones come in here. A few more comments. I hope everyone's reading along. A great observation from Stephen about how Republicans are the ones who actually are going against Mother Nature. If you look in the kind of the tapestry of biology, you'll obviously see a huge variety of experience. Some more, a great link here from Tony about the rainbow sticker. Damian shared a link to some fantastic buttons that Iowa Safe School had made in partnership with the Union Printer. Sarah made a really powerful observation about how bravery is not the same thing as perpetual resilience, the importance of checking in on our family and our friends who may be trans or LGBTQ, because this is a very, very stressful time for the community overall. Libby asked a really good question that I want to make sure that we get to because we are running a little low on time. What are the possible implications that these bills may have on public college students? Damian, why don't we turn it over to you to provide a quick answer to that question, and we'll try to answer just one or two more here before we turn it over to CJ Peterson to wrap us up.
Yeah, I would say the majority of these bills are targeted at high school, middle school, and elementary age students. However, there was a piece of legislation, and it's slipping my mind. I should know the bill number. I'm pulling up my list, stand by. But this legislation would require House File 7. There we go. It would require the Board of Regents schools to report. There's like 50 some different terms, some of them which I did not graduate that long ago, mind you, and I graduated from a liberal arts college. I have never heard of some of these terms. And then some of them do have to do with LGBTQ inclusion, especially when it comes to teacher professional development and ensuring that the classroom is a safe space. And this is really intended to chill free speech on college campuses once again, especially regarding curriculum being taught by our college professors in order to make sure that our college graduates are prepared to have the soft skills that that employers are looking for. So that's kind of the big one. But for the most part, most of these bills are, again, targeted towards those K through 12 students.
All right. Unfortunately, folks, we have run out of time for more questions. We have a few more in the chat. So Kathy and CJ, I hope that we're able to respond directly to a few folks here who have gotten some more questions in. I want to take a quick moment before we close out to thank again our fantastic panelists this evening, Elinor, Mary, and Damian. Also, Sarah, I hope that you and Odin have a good rest of your evening and are able to hang tough. I know it's a really difficult time for families like yours. So just know that you're in the thoughts and prayers for a lot of us who are here at the State House. Finally, I want to turn it over to my good friend, CJ Peterson. CJ is a member of our State Central Committee for the Iowa Democratic Party. Is chair of the Stonewall Caucus. CJ, I'll turn it over to you to take it away and close us out this evening.
Thank you very much, Zach. One thing I want to do as we close out is to remind everybody that when you're taking the time to speak with your legislators or writing to the members of a subcommittee, et cetera, our relationships with our legislators come in a lot of forms. So one thing that I've always loved about our state, Iowa, is that it's historically been someplace that leans forward toward progress, where people are allowed to grow and learn from each other and become better. And that's how a gun-owning, gay, disabled, church-going, married, former Republican turned Democrat like me, who is the chair of the Iowa Democratic Party Stonewall Caucus, have a nice conversation with my Republican representative who, voted against Kim Reynolds' voucher bill, right? So most of the time, your legislator, even if they are a Republican or if they're a Democrat, they do want to hear from us, even if they don't agree with us from the start. So it all begins with those relationships. I would like to thank you, Zach, Elinor, Damian, Mary, all of you for joining us this evening, and a special thank you to Sarah and Odin for sharing your story. And thanks to Kieran, Suzanne, and Jen for helping us out behind the scenes. So before we sign off, I would be remiss if I didn't ask everyone if you are able to donate to the Heart of Iowa Democrats. There's an Act Blue link that'll be dropped in the chat room, the Iowa Democratic Party, to your local county Democratic Party, or to organizations like Iowa Safe Schools. The next Heart of Iowa speaker series should be on March 1st. The topic is as yet undetermined, but coming. If you have ideas for the Heart of Iowa speaker series coming up, or any future Heart of Iowa Democrats speaker series, please drop those in the chat as well. I will drop my email address in the chat. And then I do want to let everyone know, just as a quick reference, if you would like to save the transcript of the chat, you can click save. There's like 3 little dots underneath the box where you type, and it says save chat, and it'll allow you to download that. If there are no other comments or questions, I'll wish you a good night. Otherwise, please let us know. Like I said, we're going to drop our emails, and we will go from there. So the Heart of Iowa Democrats, we'll see you guys next month for their speaker series. But again, from the Stonewall Democrats, thank you so much for joining and for being involved in our democratic process.